If you watch this game, nothing about the first, second, or maybe even the third quarter would have made you think that today we would be talking about the New York Liberty being down 0-1 in the WNBA Finals. They were in complete control. I think at one point they were up by 18 points. And the start of my show it brings us here. Going into, first and foremost, actually, let me say this. First and foremost, the New York Liberty have never won a WNBA Finals. They're one of a few teams in the WNBA that has never captured a WNBA championship. And the history doesn't come in when we talk about not having it. Everyone knows if your team has one and if your team doesn't. Where the history comes in is how they have historically collapsed in a lot of the WNBA finals they have been in. Remember, they lost on their home. In fact, let me widen out this browser. Going into game one of this series, I believe that the New York Liberty was 0-5 in game ones of the WNBA Finals. Let's not get it confused, and let's not get it twisted. We're not making any grand changes, grand assumptions off of one game. It's just one game. And we've seen on several occasions a team lose game one and ultimately come back and win the series. So I'm not saying that the New York Liberty are essentially done. I'm not saying that because the New York Liberty didn't win game one, you can just wrap up the WNBA Finals. Let's also not forget that this is sort of a even though you don't want to paint it this way for ratings, this is sort of a David versus Goliath type matchup. That's why when we were watching the playoffs, a lot of people said that the WNBA Finals was essentially the rematch from last year, the Vegas Aces going against the New York Liberty. Both of those teams matched up perfectly when you look at the roster, and of course, it was the rematch to last year. And I know I went on a limb and picked the Minnesota Lynx to win, but it would be a Herculean effort if they win. I mean, the New York Liberty is the most stacked team in basketball when we talk about the WNBA. They have former MVPs. They have scoring champs. They have everything that you could ask for. But history, it's how do I say it? You ever wonder if a football team that is on the brink of history in the worst way, if they know? They do. That's why they usually, when you see them, they play a little tighter. They don't play the best. It's a psychological thing. For people that still don't understand and still don't know, football, sports in general, is more mental than physical. Yes, you have to be a physically dominant individual to play a sport, but it's more mental. There's so much stuff you have to remember, you have to calculate, you have to process in the moment. Sports is much more a mental realm than it is a physical. And I'm sure there was a point. not saying that this is the reason why they lost, but I'm sure there was a point when the New York Liberty were up. And you see how the Vegas Aces had a chance to come back and win. And you see how let's just be honest about the New York Liberty. Yes, they are one of the most stacked teams, if not the most stacked team in the WNBA in basketball. Their depth and their talent is the main reason why they find themselves in the WNBA finals. However, one thing that the one thing that the New York Liberty does that probably will frustrate not only fans but the team is they have a weird tendency of allowing teams to linger. They have a weird tendency of allowing teams to stay in the fight. They don't usually, for some reason, a lot of times they don't have that death blow. Now, when they do, they do. But you saw that in the Vegas Aces Liberty series. Again, the Aces, the Liberty gave them every opportunity to come back. They just weren't able to seize it. And you would think in the WNBA finals, an 18-point lead would be insurmountable, seeing as though only one team has ever come back from that in WNBA history in the finals. But when you have Courtney Williams, when you have Kayla McBride, when you have Nafisa Collier all combining for 66 points, that's tough. And Courtney Williams having one of the best fourth quarters we've seen or most important fourth quarters we've seen in WNBA history, hitting a huge 4-point play. You know what's crazy about this game? I was watching. I'm like, yo, if you had any question if this was if basketball, if sports in general was a mental game, watch this game. Obviously, talent was spewing throughout the court. But if you look at the end of the fourth quarter and you look at the end of overtime, or overtime in general, it was the mental mistakes that honestly could have buried both teams. Whether you talk about turnovers that were rushing, bad fouls, terrible unforced turnovers. That's mental. I'm not gonna disrespect these young ladies. These are basketball players. They know they're playing for the ultimate goal. So they know what they have to do. So I'm not gonna say they're dumb or anything. But what I'm saying is pressure sometimes judges your mental. And now as we sit here, history is not on the New York Liberty side. I know I picked the Minnesota Lynx to win. And I'm not saying they can't. But the last 6 WNBA finals winners won game 1. And shouts out to the Minnesota Lynx for winning game 1. And I think that the best part about it is, this game showed you the best of the Minnesota Lynx. And the fact of this is why they're here. This is why they won the Commissioner's Cup. This is why they were able to overcome the Connecticut Sun, who a lot of people had beating them in the semifinals. And this is why now they're up 1-0 in the WNBA finals. It's while you have Nafisa Collier. I think that's kind of where the Vegas Aces kind of went wrong at this year. The Vegas Aces, obviously their whole identity is the greatness of A'ja Wilson. What we saw in the previous 2 years is, while the gap between A'ja Wilson and her teammates was wide as far as talent, Kelsey Gray is still great. Kelsey Plum is still Chelsea Gray, I'm sorry. Kelsey Plum is still great. Jackie Young is still great. Like, you still had a nucleus of talent. That talent outside of A'ja Wilson, because obviously we know she had the greatest in statistical season a WNBA player's ever had. Whether we talk about, recovering from injury and just having a bad season, the talent wasn't close. As far as A'ja Wilson was just on a planet of her own, and then as far as talent-wise, I'm not saying chemistry, and her teammates, they just had bad seasons. What we're seeing from the Minnesota Lynx is it can be a multitude of people. While we know who the best player is on this team, obviously the defensive player of the year in Nafisa Collier, but Kayla McBride was huge, playing 43 minutes, hit 4 threes. Courtney Williams was probably the MVP of the game, especially that fourth quarter. She had 23 points. She had a big 4-point play. The thing that is great about this team is, while they know who their best player is, and there's no question who the best player is for the Minnesota Lynx, they can win. It can be somebody different almost every night. And that can be the same thing. That can be the same. Like, you can say the same thing for the New York Liberty. I think this was a bad loss. This was a terrible loss. Again, when you're up by 18 points, there's no way that you should allow a team to come back. It just doesn't happen, or it shouldn't happen. And I don't think that we should worry. I mean, we saw, let me see. Breonna Stewart went 6 for 21. Jonquel Jones went 9 for 14. That was cool. Sabrina Nadescu, there's a reason why people were saying that the key to this series is how Sabrina Nadescu plays. I don't know if you guys pay attention to, let's just shrink the sample size. If you pay attention to this playoffs, nearly every single time Sabrina Nadescu has a bad game, it's either a very close game for the New York Liberty or they lose. The game where the Vegas Aces just ran them out the gym, Sabrina Nadescu had like 4 points. While, yes, Breonna Stewart is their best player, and they have a litany of talent on the New York Liberty, when your essentially starting guard is 8 for 26, that's not a win. And how many and 3 turnovers? That's not a winning formula. Shouts out to the ladies that cover and that are covering the WNBA, and they said it when we talk about the pregame. They were like, "Yo, Sabrina Nadescu is the key to the WNBA Finals. If the Minnesota Lynx are able to, she's the only one. Don't get me wrong, Breonna Stewart is the best player, but Sabrina Nadescu is the only one that kind of has that Steph Curry type feel, as far as when she gets hot, she starts hitting deep threes. It's like, all right, well, there's nothing we can do. Good game." And she didn't have that. So I'm not going to bury the New York Liberty, but what I will say is they are now fighting history, which doesn't stop them from obviously doing what they have to do, but the last time, I'll say it like this, the last time the winner of Game 1 did not win the WNBA Finals was in 2017. I think that was the LA Sparks. Since 2017, every single WNBA champion has won Game 1. Now, take that information what you will. I'm not going to bury the New York Liberty, but what I am going to say is that was a bad loss. Not because you lost to a team that essentially you should be better than. It's because you had them up by 18 points. And you allowed them, you gave, and on top of the worst part, and the last thing I'll say, the worst part is both teams were trying to give this game away, especially at the end of the fourth and the overtime. Whether we talk about some of the bonehead turnovers, some of the missed shots, and then, of course, you have arguably one of the greatest WNBA players in the history of the sport go and miss a free throw and then miss a game-tying layup in overtime. I don't expect Breonna Stewart to do that again, but that's what happened. So, congratulations to the Minnesota Lynx for beating the New York Liberty 95-93 in Game 1 of the WNBA Finals. Oh, man, you stayed to the end of the video. I appreciate you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss any content from your boy. You can also go back and watch past episodes, past clips, and don't forget that the Unpopular Podcast, new episodes drop every Wednesday and Saturday. Appreciate you.